And good morning to everyone watching. I've been really disappointed with the amount of or the lack of any amount of audio description coming out of Australian cinemas. Um, so I wrote a letter, or I rang Screen Australia, and they asked me to get some movie names to send in so they can do an investigation, which I did do. I sent them a list of movies that Australian movies that had no audio description, because according to Screen Australia from 2011, any movies receiving funding from Screen Australia have to have captioning and audio description for people blind or vision impaired. All of them, part of the funding. So I'll get a response back from Screen Australia last week, and it was quite a large response, bureaucratic word salad, and it was quite. There's a few points where it's contradictory into what they were trying to express, but basically all the movies have captioning. They're going to review their auditing process, but less than half had audio description on their in their production, where part of the contractual agreement for the funding is that all of the movies produced or funded by Screen Australia have captioning and audio description. Every one of them have captioning. Less than a half have audio description, so they've fallen down on the auditing process there. And they also said that they have no control over, what the distributors do, which I find a bit hard to believe. But what I'll do now, I'll get Chris to read out a couple of the main points in the letter. As you know, I can't read it myself, so I'll just hand over to you now, Chris. We just read out those couple of points.
Okay. So I've got, this is most of the way, it's sort of the conclusion of the letter. And the paragraph here that I'm reading says for the remaining titles, so they talk about some of the titles that maybe don't need an audio description for various reasons. But it says for the remaining titles that are feature films funded by Screen Australia, all offer captioning on multiple platforms. Approximately half of these films offer audio description on at least one platform, for example via DVD or a streaming platform. But for the remaining half, it appears that audio description may not be offered, at least on non-theatrical platforms. Producers were at all times required by Screen Australia's terms of trade to include captioning and audio description. However, as Screen Australia does not ultimately have control over the distribution arrangements that are separately negotiated between producers and distributors, broadcasters, or other platforms, it is unfortunately not in a position to insist that accessible versions of these films are made available to audiences.
Okay. All right. So I call bull on that statement. Part of the contractual agreements, they have to provide it. Now, if the production was done with the audio description, then why would not the distributors take that MP4 file with the audio description as a separate track, also embedded into the MP4? Why would the distributors spend time and money removing that option? I call bull on that. I don't believe that to be true. Also, it's, from what they were saying, part of the production, the funding of the audio description is part of the production costs and has to be included. So why can't they say to the distributors, this has audio description, we have to provide by contract to provide the audio description, please leave it in. I just don't understand that train of thought, and I really don't believe that distributors would actually remove that audio description file from that movie. I think they would just leave it in. Plus, the production company would want it to remain in to get to a wider audience and get more money back on their investments. It just doesn't make sense. So I sent a letter of response to Screen Australia asking them to clarify those points, and I'll update everyone on that clarification. But I'm just sick of people not doing their jobs. Now, Screen Australia should be auditing every one of those movies to make sure it has closed captioning and audio description as per their contract. Just because someone says it is doesn't mean it's so. And as I said in my letter of response, sometimes there's confusion for people who don't know the difference between closed captioning for people who are hearing impaired and for audio description for people who are blind or vision impaired. I understand there's some confusion. I've had to explain that myself a few times to people. But really, Screen Australia needs to up their game on the auditing and actually take action against those production companies that don't actually produce the audio description as they're required to per their contract. I'm just sick of it. I'm missing out on all these good movies. I watched one recently called Transfusion. It did have audio description. Don't watch it. It's a really bad movie. It's had opportunity to be a really good movie, but yeah, the main character and the direction it took really let the storyline down. I'd give it 1 out of 5 stars. It was quite poor. But I don't know about anyone else, but I'm just sick of everyone else getting to see these movies. And just because I'm blind, I have to miss out on 3/4 of the movies that are released because, they say half, but I think it's more than half that don't have the audio description, even though they've ticked that box saying that it is, and it hasn't been audited by Screen Australia. So it's a huge letdown, a huge failure on the part of Screen Australia. Pick up your game. There are between 500,000 and 600,000 people in Australia who are either blind or have a moderate to severe vision impairment. And I did some reading on the World Health Organization website pre-2010 when I was taking my local council to the Human Rights Commission. And according to the World Health Organization, there are over 300 million people worldwide who have a moderate to severe vision impairment to where they need assistance, and over 30 million people worldwide who are totally blind with no light perception, like myself. So that's like 1/3 of a billion people. 1/3 of a billion. That's a lot. That's a hell of a lot. And with our aging population, that rate in Australia between, I think it's around about 550, 560,000 people in Australia. And with the aging population, that's just going to keep growing every year. Now with macular degeneration, cataracts, RP, everyone knows, the age-related eye diseases. But yeah, huge fail, huge fail by Screen Australia for not auditing and making the production companies adhere to their contractual agreements. I don't know. Is there any comments? Nothing at the moment. Okay. All right. So we'll when I get the response to my letter of clarification, I'll let everyone know. But also, we found a couple of news stories in the last week regarding people with disabilities. The first one is the Rosewood Downs School, inappropriate behaviour. I'll let Chris read that story. Have you read that story, please, Chris?
Okay, let's bring that story up. A Victorian school is under fire and a teacher has been suspended. Sorry, I've got advertisements popping up in front of the screen. Give me a second. There we go. A Victorian school is under fire and a teacher has been suspended after sharing a highly offensive farewell video that mocked students with disabilities, complete with unsolicited photos of the vulnerable kids. The video, which was shown to more than 20 teachers at Rosewood Downs Primary School staff Christmas party as a farewell to outgoing Principal Julian Grocott, was rife with sexual innuendos, references to the children and their families, including images allegedly used without permission. Set to You're the Voice by John Farnham, the 5-minute video contained references to erections and plays on words including premature ejaculation and pulling out, which is an article from news.com.au on the date, the 28th of February.
Okay. Now, the teacher that one of the teachers responsible was the welfare teacher who was now responsible for the welfare of people with disabilities, students with disabilities. You know, that's really, for someone in that position, looking after the welfare of children with disabilities, to be participate in that is not good. They should not have that job. That they should be protected, not be made to be the butt of everyone's jokes. It's, you know, we all know it's hard enough living with a disability without people taking the piss. It's just not appropriate. And I hope the Education Department in Victoria takes the appropriate action. Also, there was a story on a current affair. I'll just get Chris to play that clip for us. Just play that, please, Chris.
When disability advocate Stephanie Travers went to Sydney's Royal North Shore Hospital in September for her depression, she was looking for care and support. She says what she got was a highly traumatic experience.
Incredibly humiliated, degraded. No one cared about whether they hurt me.
Stephanie has spina bifida and uses a wheelchair. She says she was manhandled by security after denying claims she was smoking in an emergency department toilet. Then she was sectioned under the Mental Health Act.
I was refused access to my wheelchair. I was told it was a weapon. I was refused access to my leg braces.
Stephanie alleges nurses tried to take her phone and she fell out of her wheelchair onto the tile floor. After her mother complained, Stephanie Travers was considered well enough to be promptly discharged with no follow-up. She had bruised hands, legs and arms and says she spent the next week in bed in pain.
I'm now at this point where I don't know where to go and I don't know where to seek help.
Advocate Jeff Smith says people with disabilities suffer higher rates of mental illness but often don't receive the care they need.
What people are saying is that the current system is very institutionalised, it's very isolating, often coercive.
The issue is so serious, it's gone all the way to the United Nations.
We do need a new model, a new community-based model.
Police are now investigating Stephanie Travers' case. She's also lodged an official complaint with the Northern Sydney Local Health District. It says hospital staff have contacted the patient to discuss her concerns and apologised for her distress.
It's restraint, seclusion, exploitation, threatening and assault, and it shouldn't happen.
And Stephanie Travers hopes it doesn't happen to anyone else. Mary Louise Vince, ABC News, Gosford.
Okay, so she was assaulted by security staff to pull someone out of a wheelchair is an assault. Unwanted touching is an assault. So the security had no rights to touch it. Their job's to observe and report and restrain someone if they're in fear of their own life. But to drag someone out of a wheelchair and not allow her to have access to that wheelchair because it can be used as a weapon, unless it has a motorbike motor on the back of it. Ridiculous. It's assault. It's abuse. And it shouldn't happen. If I was her, I'd be seeking legal advice on suing. It's just, how do we get people to learn? We keep saying and explaining the rights of people with disabilities, but they're just being ignored. Do we have to start attacking people's hip pockets to get them to listen? As a last resort, maybe that's what we need to do. But this is not the first story I've heard like this. There was a case a few weeks ago in Adelaide where the woman was in a wheelchair smoking, and they told her to get off. She refused. She did the wrong thing. She should be held accountable. But to drag her out of a chair onto the station platform, that's assault. When is it going to stop? People just don't, we're all expected to sit in a corner and be patted on the head and told to appreciate what we got. Things have changed, but they haven't changed. I remember watching a movie years ago called Annie's Coming Out. It's it's one of the best Australian movies I've ever seen in my whole life. It's about a girl living in an institution because the mother couldn't care for her. And a social worker took her under a wing and fostering her. But brilliant story. And a tragic story as well. But if you ever get to see that movie, Annie's Coming Out, watch it. Fantastic movie. 5 out of 5 for that one. But this poor girl refused access to a wheelchair, refused access to leg braces. For what reason? Because she put up a struggle because she said she was innocent. They hit her with the Mental Health Act. That's taking somebody's freedom. So they stole her freedom. They physically assaulted her. They restrained her. And they're now going to investigate, and the nurses are rang up and apologised, and it's too late. The damage is being done. This poor person going through what she went through. And it wasn't only until her mother spoke up that she was released from the mental facility. They hit her with the Mental Health Act. I mean, how low can these people go? They stole her freedom, they stole her wheelchair, they stole the calipers. They've assaulted her. And they think sorry's enough? No. Assault charges need to be laid. and she needs to be compensated for the loss of freedom. Imagine just being ripped out of your wheelchair and put in an institution because you said you wasn't guilty of something they accused you of doing. I'd fight back as hard as I could, physically fight back as hard as I could if somebody tried that with me. But, you know, I'm a male at 6'1", you know, over 110 kilos. I can defend myself, but, you know, this lady with spina bifida in a wheelchair with leg calipers. That's disgusting. And those people should lose their job. For starters, they should have assault charges laid on them, as well as kidnap, because that's basically what they did. They kidnapped her using the Mental Health Act. She was going to the hospital because she was suffering with depression. I suffered with depression. In 2001, 2002, it was terrible. And because I argue with someone, should I be hit with the Mental Health Act and have my freedom stolen? No. It's got to stop. It's ridiculous. Anyway, also last week I sent my application into the tribunal, to the AAT, regarding the financial assistance I requested for the accessible version for my reverse cycle air conditioning. We paid for the motor, which was over $10,000. The accessible part was $3,500. It's installed. We had to use our home loan withdrawal facility to do it. So we're going to be paying interest on that $3,500, and rates have gone up yet again yesterday. So by the time this goes through the tribunal, and if I win, I'll get my $3,500 back, which is what I'm asking for. But what about the interest on our home loan? It's not fair. Anyway, had it installed. The thing's brilliant, the system I got. I'm not going to mention its name just yet. I want to get permission from the company. But I can turn, in the middle of winter when it's, minus 8, 9, 10, I can come into the office where I am now and turn the office heater on up to whatever, 22, 23 degrees. Or I can turn the air conditioning on if it gets too hot through summer. It's accessible. I can use it. Our old one that we had for 20 years wasn't accessible. I constantly tried to turn it on, the heater on, through the middle of winter, and like twice last winter, I turned the AC on in the middle of winter. Anyway, the accessible version's in. It's $3,500 that I'm asking for assistance for. I've also written to the AAT to record the whole tribunal process in the public interest, and I'm waiting to hear about that too. So hopefully I'll be able to stream it live when I start going through that process. I know we won't be able to identify the NDIS staff and tribunal staff, but that's fine. I just want everyone to see what it's like to go through the tribunal process and the sort of comments that are made by, or possibly made by the NDIS staff. I know last time when I did it, I was told to ring a support worker to get them to come around and make me a cup of coffee or turn the heater up. So, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, if I ring a support worker up and say, come up, make me a cup of coffee, I know what the support workers are going to say. Unless I have KY gel, I'm not going to be able to do it. You know, it's just ridiculous. And the person who denied it said it was health related, when it's not. It's because I'm blind. And also on the NDIS website, MS is declared a permanent disability, permanent injury. So, you know, they acknowledged the MS. It was the MS that destroyed the optic nerves. So, you know, which left me blind. But I need to be able to control my body temperature, which I can't do very well at the moment. I'm struggling. But yeah, but this person who's hearing impaired and they have an interpreter. No disrespect to this person at all. They prefer to use an interpreter because it suits them best and it's the most accessible thing for them. I understand that. But why can't they use speech to text? That's a lot cheaper. Then you don't have to have a person walking around with you all the time. But I wouldn't say that to that person. I'd say, well, if you personally need an interpreter, then you have that right to have a personal, you know, have someone there to interpret for you. Just like I have a right to access the heating system and cooling system. I shouldn't be forced to use a system where I can't use or access. Just like you shouldn't be forced not to use an interpreter. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Anyway, that's my rant about the NDIS for this week. I'm just so sick of them. They're so inconsistent. It's, you know, they different rules for different people. It's just ridiculous. Anyway, is there anyone in chat? No one. All right. Okay, so we'll leave it there for the week. There's no one in chat. But I will let everyone know Screen Australia's response to my letter of clarification. They failed in auditing their contracts to making sure that all the movies they funded have audio description as well as closed captioning. And shame on that primary school, shame on those security staff and health workers at Royal North. Shame, 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 as Darren Henchwood used to say. And I'll keep you informed about the tribunal process. Okay, we'll just leave it there. All right, thanks, Chris.